Welcome to the Success is Subjective podcast series brought to you by collegealternative.org, presented by Lilley Consulting. I'm your host, Joanna Lilley. In today's episode, I had the pleasure of interviewing Brian Frumberg. Brian is CEO and founder of Venture Out and co-founder and president of the NYC Innovation Collective. Driven by a passion for technology and startups, Brian planted his flag in New York's tech community when he joined Gotham Ventures in 2009 and began charting his own path in 2012 with the launch of Venture Out. Venture Out is now regularly ranked as the top 5 most active technology accelerators in the world. And Brian has been named one of the top 50 NYC tech influencers of 2019 by AlleyWatch, and New York City Tech's 35 People to Watch in 2016 by Built in NYC. Venture Out sources top technology companies from around the world and helps them to raise capital, launch, and scale in the U.S. market. To date, Venture Out has supported over 2,000 entrepreneurs representing 1,200 companies from 28 countries, and Brian has worked personally with each and every one of them. These companies have gone on to raise over $5 billion in capital from investors like Mark Zuckerberg and Google Ventures, have created over 15,000 jobs, and have experienced billions in exits, including acquisitions and IPOs. In partnership with over 40 governments, Venture Out accelerates over 150 companies each and supporting more international startups for U.S. expansion than any organization in the world. In 2016, Brian co-founded the New York City Innovation Collective, a nonprofit which represents over 225 accelerators, incubators, corporate innovation, and university innovation offices in New York City, which has become one of the few nonprofits that represent the New York City tech community. Brian is also a founding member of the Innovation Council for VWD.US, a Silicon Valley nonprofit focused on immigration reform. Brian's career has spanned venture capital, consulting, product management, and sales and roles at Gotham Ventures, OTR Global, and Standards & Poor's. Brian received his Bachelor of Science in Business Administration from the University of Richmond. Now, all of that is a lot. What I can tell you is Brian is a dear friend of mine. He is extremely smart and knowledgeable in what he has done, and he's been extremely creative, and he'll also identify how lucky he has been. But that is beside the point because his journey certainly is nonlinear. Let's not wait any longer. This is Brian. All right, Brian, I don't know your full story, and we have joked around a ton of times, and I'm excited to just honestly hear a little bit of your story. And kind of offline, we were talking a little bit about hey, this is great because now you can finally share, this is the version of the story you really want to tell. And so I'm excited to hear you tell it. But just right out of the gate, tell the podcast listeners, where did you actually grow up, and what was the messaging that you were getting from your family, as well as kind of the larger cultural or community in which you were raised, about the idea of post-secondary education?
So I grew up in Long Island, pretty close to the city, a town called Garden City. My parents both grew up about half an hour from there in a town called Long Beach, which was much more of a blue collar community than the one I grew up in, and sort of their background. And I had different but similar messages from my family and from my town that I grew up in. And in my family, it was Jewish grandma, but education is the most important thing in the world. Doctor, lawyer, we're really shooting for the stars here. And it was the first thing my grandma Gloria would talk to me about whenever we talked, and we talked a lot. My dad, her son, really performed. He graduated magna cum laude from NYU on a full ride. He spent his first 2 years actually going to community college because he couldn't afford anything else, and then turned that into acceptance to NYU. And then he was paying his own way, and he talked them into giving him a full ride. And he basically finished his MBA there. And I say basically because I think he left in his last semester because he worked full time all the way through undergraduate and graduate, and sort of already had made his way and didn't really need to finish. So that was a pretty intense bar set and just general family philosophy around education. I mentioned mostly like my Jewish grandmother and my father, but my mom's father started at Columbia when he was 16 years old. My mom did really well in school until she and my father decided to have 6 children. And then she just became good at helping us with our education and was like the busiest person in show business. So that was the family side of it. The town I grew up in was a pretty well-off town in Long Island that had a public school that rivals most private schools in terms of the quality of its education, and a really intelligent like student base. And so it was very competitive and intense. It was interesting because it was both academically intense, but also socially intense. You know, it wasn't this place where like dumb jocks rule the world. It was this place where like smart jocks rule and they go to Princeton. Like the entire graduating midfield line on the lacrosse team in the town I grew up in all went to Princeton for lacrosse. So very different, very similar also in intensity. And so when it came to college, there was not really a question. It was always an assumption. And I think that my generation, so I was born in 83, I'm 40. Many of the parents of my generation had gone to college, but not all of them. Mine was the generation where, obviously things change geographically where you grow up, but there was probably more intensity for us to go to college than any generation that had come before us. It very much was an expectation. I think that's actually dialed back today, where the cost of education has gotten so insane and the options for free education online, whether it's Khan Academy or something else, or career paths that don't require an undergraduate or graduate degree, which include, this is not like blue collar stuff. I mean, it is that, right? You can make like, I think $125,000 is the starting salary for a plumber because we're so desperate for people in those kinds of jobs, but also for a computer programmer. Like we work with a lot of like educational boot camps to help people get into the technology world. And, you know, you can go take a 3 or 6 month course that'll cost less than a semester at college, and they will then help you get placed at a job where you're now a designer or a programmer or, fill in the blank. So I think the intensity reached very much a fever pitch around the time I was like applying to college. I didn't go to my local high school. I went to a private Catholic all boys torture chamber, I describe it as, but that's really just a joke. It's very intense to go to school in the kind of environment where like you get yelled at if your top button isn't buttoned and your tie isn't all the way up. It's very different than most people's high school experiences. But I'm very grateful for it. I also somehow had a moment of clarity at like 13 years old where I chose to do that. I chose not to go to my local high school because I knew it was socially intense and I knew there was a big sort of party scene and I didn't feel like that would be the best for my academic development. Even if like my daily decisions weren't always great for my academic development, that moment of clarity was definitely a good one. And had a great experience. I mean, like the school I went to, like my best friends were, almost all of them were in the top 10 of our class of over 400 kids in a very competitive school. So like being smart and doing well was cool. And, set another sort of bar of expectation that was really high. So I studied a lot for the SATs. I had the benefit of having a family that could get me tutoring for that as well. I had college guidance support at high school. I had a little bit outside. I think I met with someone like a couple of times to figure out like where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do to sort of have those conversations about the college application process. I had a lot of ideas about where I wanted to go. Georgetown was my number one choice. I did not have the resume to get into Georgetown, but I approach a lot of aspects of my life with this idea of wanting to be the exception to the rule. What's funny is that I like in my job, I train people in companies and I educate, and I'm always telling people not to try to be the exception to the rule. But when it came to college, I wanted to apply to a lot and figured one of them might make a mistake, and let someone who's underqualified in. So I applied to a lot of schools. My year was the first year. So I graduated high school in 2001. It was one of the first years that the Common App was available. And so it made my life a lot easier. Also, a lot of schools hadn't developed supplementals on top of the Common App. And so once I had completed the Common App and I wrote not just one essay for it, I'd written a few, which meant that like a lot of schools did have, not all of them, but a lot of schools did have supplementals that I was applying to. And I basically had all the boxes checked. There was like maybe a couple of schools that I had to write a specific essay for at that time. So I applied to a ton of schools, mostly Reach. I had like an approved number of, what we then called safety and target schools, and then a ridiculous number of Reach schools. I ended up going to University of Richmond, both because I think it was the best school I got into, but also because when I visited the campus, I really fell in love with it. Sort of like the moment of clarity I had going into high school or choosing to go to high school where I went. I visited, and the only person in that school that was from my high school was like the president of the honor council and a very impressive person. And I was like, this is a place that I could succeed academically. And like a lot of other colleges I visited, I like really partied my ass off at. And even though they were great schools and I could have done well there, and you could probably make an argument that some of them would have been a better environment for me, that was the information I had at the time, and that was the decision I made. So I went to University of Richmond in 2001 with the idea of majoring in psychology. And anyway.
Let's pause for a second, and I'm just going to ask you a more specific question about the transition to the University of Richmond, and then you can kind of take that and run with it too. So oftentimes I'm kind of hearing from the guests, like the lead up to high school graduation and then the decision for like, well, what do you do at the age of 18? What did you do? You perfectly painted a picture of the path that led you to down in Richmond. And I don't know the full story, but I have an inkling of an idea. And so I'm excited for you to share kind of how that all unfolded, but talk about what was the transition down there like and kind of what played out once you got there?
So there's a whole aspect that I didn't touch on that I won't touch on now, but maybe we can later, about my work life. Because I started working jobs when I was young, when I was like 13, and had an opportunity to actually work as an intern at like a real company when I was in high school. 3 internships actually. And so I had like a different professional experience going into school, going into college. But I went to a really intense high school, and so I felt pretty prepared for college. I was wrong. I was wrong in terms of like being prepared socially and from a maturity perspective, but also from an educational rigor perspective. And when I say I was wrong, I think that's specific to University of Richmond. I have a lot of friends that went to a lot of schools on par with where I went, schools that were ranked a little lower than where I went, and, all the way up to the Ivies. From everyone that I talked to, I had the most intense academic environment at Richmond. Every single professor we had assigned what felt like the amount of work that should be the entire semester's worth of work. And then you multiplied that by 4 or 5 classes that you took in a semester. So it was really overwhelming immediately. And that's like with a background of intensity in high school. So it really pushed me and challenged me, but I wasn't prepared for that. As opposed to like, I had a few really good friends that were at Villanova. I would have been totally fine there. Like I would have had much higher grades. I would have had much less assigned on a daily basis. Like I had friends that were like at Villanova, they gave you a computer your freshman year and you were expected to have that in every class. And I had friends that were, and I think that's maybe an expectation now. I went to class with notebooks. Like I had a computer, but I went to class and took written notes. So I would like talk to, on AOL Instant Messenger in 2001, 2002. I would talk to one of my buddies at Villanova, and he was like, "Oh, I'm in class." And I'm like, "You're in class?" And he was like having a full conversation with me and joking with me and sending me stuff. And the idea of doing that in one of my classes at Richmond made me like nauseous. And I didn't do great either. I graduated with a 2.8, and that was with finishing really strongly. So, and even so, so Richmond was really intense. That academic transition was really hard. I also had pretty strict parents. I very much raged against the machine as a child, and my parents probably would say I still am. But the freedom of college was something that I wasn't mature enough to really handle, while also handling my business of college. So the transition was both great and terrible. I loved being at school. I made great friends. I had a lot of fun. I had experiences I'd never had before that I was yearning to have. And I had experiences that I really didn't want to have. So I mean, even my first semester, I was preparing to pledge for a fraternity, and I was trying to do well in school. I ended up getting mono and having it so badly that I didn't come back to school after Thanksgiving break. I was basically laid up for a month, unable to do anything. I mean, I remember there was a day where I felt better, and I was like, I need to go to the grocery store just to get myself enough food, because I wasn't getting up and going to the dining hall, and I needed to go buy frozen meals. And I got into the grocery store. I'd filled my cart up with a bunch of stuff, and then had such a wave of exhaustion hit me that I left it in the middle of the aisle, walked into my car, drove back to my dorm, and went to sleep. And so I was starting to feel better around Thanksgiving, but I'd missed so much class that it was just easier to just drop the whole semester and not take any grades. And that also meant that I couldn't pledge because I didn't reach the minimum GPA because I didn't have a GPA. Yeah, the transition side was really intense in good and bad ways, but I definitely think back. I wouldn't change anything. I'm happy with where I am. But if I were to carve the best path for myself with, hindsight, I probably would have done a postgraduate year or two.
Well, and you said too, you had internships, right, in high school. So you already had a leg up compared to a lot of your academic peers in college anyways, because you've got professional experience that a lot of folks don't necessarily have until they're, 21, 22, 23, graduating with a piece of paper and are clueless what it's like to be in a work environment, right? We've been conceptualizing it for so long. It sounds like collectively, your college transition was a little bit bumpy, a little bit unexpected. And I appreciate your candor and sharing kind of the ways in which you felt like you were prepared and the ways in which you weren't prepared, and hindsight, because I do think, when we're 20 years past where, this age point, it's easy to look back and say, whew, I would have, my brain is fully developed at this point and I would have made different decisions. All right. Well, okay. So even with crunching, really hard, pushing yourself, 2.8 GPA, you get your degree. Was it in psychology? Did you graduate in psychology? I don't even know.
No. So as a result of the internships that I had, I changed my focus and what I wanted to do. I ended up majoring in business with a concentration in finance. Business is something that I wanted to do. Finance was not something I didn't want to do, but it was more chasing a path that I thought I should be on and following in my father's footsteps. But was 2 classes away from minoring in both music and philosophy. So I took a lot of philosophy and a lot of music classes. And that was just I've been passionate about music since I was a kid. I still play today. And I was just really intrigued. I took one philosophy class and loved it. And loved those classes as much as any other classes I took in school. So the reason I didn't minor in one or both of them was because I just felt like no one gave a shit if you had a minor or not. And so when it came down to the choice of like, do I take the class that I need to take in order to get a minor, or do I take the class I actually want to take? I just took what I wanted to take. So like I avoided taking a bunch of like music history classes and just focused in the areas that I wanted to focus in, which were like performance and theory. So, and the same thing with philosophy.
So what did you do then after, like, once you finally graduated? Talk about the journey leading up to like what you're doing now, because I wouldn't actually say I even have like a full concept and understanding what it is that you do, other than the fact that I know that you're an entrepreneur, right? Because it takes one to know one kind of a deal. But other than that, I don't know, like, how did you, like, where did you go? What did you do leading up to like where you are now?
Yeah. So like when we talked the other day about nonlinear paths, like this is definitely a nonlinear path, but it also, like, in order to really give context to like what I did after college, it was a continuation of things I was doing in college, which was a part of like my like work experience outside of education that started before college. So I always worked. I always had a good connection with like spending my time productively and being rewarded with money, as opposed to the reward structure of school, which is like keep your head down for many, many, many months. And then if you do that, you get this reward at the end, which is like super tangible. Like grades for me were important, but the reward structure of work has always worked better than the reward structure for education that exists in like standard educational environments. So I did like I did childhood stuff that was normal, like shoveling snow and whatever else. My dad got me a summer job working with one of his old friends from where he grew up that ran like a construction company. I was like mixing concrete and helping people put up siding on houses. I was a ski instructor, and then ski patrol when I was in high school, but I had worked these internships. So basically my cousin lived in Texas. I was the oldest of 6 kids. It was the summer after my freshman year in high school. And my dad was like, hey, do you want to go live with your cousin Janice for a month or two down in Texas? And Janice was 10 years older than me and my cousin, but like we were really close. And I was like, wait, I get the fuck out of here? Like, yes, please. And he was like, okay, there's a company I know down there. Like, you're going to work there when she goes to work. And so that's what I did. I went down to Austin, Texas, and I spent a month working as an intern at a company called Trilogy Software, one of like the original software companies and tech companies in Austin, along with Dell. And I interned for like a .com that was incubated within that company called PCorder.com. And I mean, I like alphabetized resumes. I wasn't doing like any high level work. I mean, I was 15, but I like really liked it. I made friends. I made friends with people. Like everyone was older than me, but I was like kind of an awkward kid growing up and always got along better with like my friends' parents than like the kids my age a lot of the time. So it was super comfortable for me. And I loved it. And I loved living with my cousin. And so I ended up doing that 3 summers in a row. Except like the summers after that, I actually got a chance to like learn real things and do real stuff. So the next year I worked at a company called carorder.com. It was the first company selling cars over the internet. They would deliver them to your door on a flatbed truck with a bow on it in 1998, 99. And I would like taught myself how to code, and I was like working with their team that was trying to figure out Y2K compliance. And then the next year I worked at a company that was selling insurance over the internet called insuranceorder.com. And I had like decided to move so I'd gone from like interested in psychology to like maybe I'll be a software engineer, to like maybe business is better for me. And so I worked under the CFO and did like a competitive analysis for them that summer. And those were like really formative experiences because I got to learn. I mean, these were dot-coms are what like today startups are called, but they were incubated. So I got a sense of what a startup was, but it was within this like comfortable corporate environment. But I got to see these people they had this thing called Trilogy University. They would recruit the best graduates from business schools and technical universities, and then they would stick them in a 3-month orientation program called Trilogy University, or TU, and they would group them together and they would come up with ideas, and at the end of this they would pitch the executive committee of Trilogy, and then they would fund at least the best one, like the winner of the competition. And this very much was like one of the first versions of a startup accelerator. They definitely don't get credit for that, and that's just because the person who started it, Trilogy, Joe Lemont, like never was big for PR, having a public face, really just for like doing business and making money, which I really respect. So I got to watch these like young grads like come up with an idea, like create a dream, and then get funded to make it come true. And that experience was super formative for me. But like spending the night sleeping under my desk and then waking up and staring at a screen and coding all day, I like knew like while I could do it, I would be not taking advantage of a lot of like interpersonal skills that I have. And I also am a super social person, so I didn't want to miss out on that. But anyway, that was what I did going into college. And then when I got to college, I was like, you know what? I've already worked like real jobs. I'm going to go lifeguard and just like chill. And I was a competitive swimmer growing up. So I had a friend who had been a lifeguard before and was going to go try and lifeguard at Jones Beach, which is like on the southern shore of Long Island, in between like JFK and then like Suffolk County and the Hamptons. There's like a long stretch of state-owned public beach called Jones Beach. They have one of the best music venues in the country there called Jones Beach Amphitheater. And it was really intense. This was not like going and lifeguarding at your local pool. Like they were super intense tryouts. You got paid over $20 an hour because you were a part of a union. It was almost like being a part of like the Army Corps. They were like lifelong career like lifeguards that were like captains and whatever else, and like were real jobs, like serious. And luckily my friend and I we grew up swimming together competitively and were really successful in high school, and were able to, I mean, most people, like if you haven't swam competitively, people that haven't done that are never going to be anywhere near you when it comes to like speed in the water. Even if I'm like now I'm horrifically out of shape, I'm a faster swimmer than like all of the fit dads in my community because none of them swim competitively. Well, one of them has actually. So he and I would have probably a pretty good race. But we crushed like the pool stuff. We crushed all the ocean swimming. I also grew up swimming in the ocean because my parents grew up on the beach. And we both got in, and it was awesome. And I spent 3 summers lifeguarding. And then I got back to interning. And I started working at this company that was sort of a fintech startup that was building a network of people that worked in companies all around the world. And then they would find investors that wanted to know something. And then they would say, oh, well, if you want to know XYZ about like this company's stock that's going to be reporting earnings next week, you should go talk to these 4 people. Like they'll totally tell you what's like the inside scoop. Not like insider trading, just sort of like people in the industry that were close enough to know a lot, but not so close that they had some kind of like confidentiality restriction. And I worked there for 2 summers. And then I, like nonlinear path, I did not finish school in 4 years. As you heard me yell at my wife yesterday, I finished in 8 semesters, but I had taken some time because I had gotten in trouble at home during the summers, and both like with my parents and with the law. And so I was not allowed to return to school. And so I ended up, and I took those breaks and I worked during them as well. So I both like did what I had to do in terms of like community service and whatever else. And like paying homage to my parents and promising I'd never do anything bad again ever for the rest of my life. And I worked. So I ended up graduating. So I started in August of 2001. I graduated. I took my last class in December of 2006, but I didn't graduate because graduation was once a year until like June of 2007. So 5.5 years. One of those semesters I lost because of mono, and then 2 semesters I lost because I'm an idiot. And so back to this fintech company I worked at that was called Vista Research. When I had my last semester, I graduated off cycle. I finished in December. And so that summer before I graduated, they offered to hire me and pay me a salary and let my last semester be like a hiatus from my job. And then I'd finish and I'd go back to work. And that was because I'd worked there for a couple of summers already. I got to know everybody. When I started there, it was 12 people. By the time I started working there out of college, they were at like 80. They had been acquired by Standard & Poor's. They had been on sort of like a rocket ship path. And I really enjoyed the work and I really excelled at it. So when I started there, they had interns, but they were all like they were like spreadsheet monkeys for the CFO. And I like really didn't want to do that. And they were like, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to do something that like helps, that matters. And like, I pointed at a guy who I'd gotten to know a little bit. And I was like, what does he do? And they told me, and I was like, I can do that. And then they were like, sure you can. And then they gave me a chance to do it. And so it was basically cold calling. So it was like, hey, we have a client that has said they want to know about this thing. You need to go find out the people that know that thing and then call them and then convince them that they want to get on the phone with our client. And I was both like excited and terrified by this prospect. And so they connected me with this guy and I got to listen in on him having all these calls and sort of like doing this work. And then he gave me a project and a list and let me like, what they call smile and dial. And I was really good at it and I loved it. And it was like terrifying and thrilling, but I loved the idea of being able to be like a 19-year-old idiot, but they had no idea. They just knew that I was calling on behalf of some like big investment firm offering to pay them money to share their wisdom and knowledge and experience. And they didn't need to know like who I was or how old I was. And so I was able to sort of like, I felt like a bit of an imposter, but it was like fun, like I was putting on someone else's clothing. And I would talk to people that were like Harvard law professors that like were impossible to even get on the phone and then convince them to like take a job with me and my company. And I dug it and I was really good at it as an intern. I was, I was the only intern that did anything like that. Everyone else, as I said, was doing more like spreadsheet PowerPoint work. And I ended up getting so good at it that the sales guys that worked and represented all these different clients would like fight over getting me to work on their projects. And so I loved it. I got paid nothing for doing it. It was like all about the experience. And so I went back and then I went back again. And so by the time I did my last internship with them, I was actually I was interviewing and hiring the incoming class of first year, like new employees. And then when I graduated and went back, they had already been working there. And then I was their boss. And so it was like a really cool opportunity to like jump in beyond where I really was, sort of like just graduating, and being able to take advantage of like the experience, the time and the effort I'd put in. And again, like that reward structure just worked so much better for me than did education.
Okay. So from here, I almost feel like I need to draw a map of like these, to connect the dots of all of these jobs and like how it overlaps with when you were in school, in high school or college. But talk about, again, where did it just sounds like you have capitalized on your skills and your ability to like be curious, be assertive, and like with drive and grit, like you're on your own rocket ship. That's what I'm hearing. So where did this, like going from now being in this place where you are now hiring these, like this incoming class of employees or interns, where did you go from here? Because I still want to make sure we're like not just talking about, but like totally spotlighting what are you doing now? So quick, like chat. If we were to put like chapters on them, what were the next chapters leading up to what you're doing now?
So I think the first thing I want to acknowledge is like I was really lucky. I had opportunities in front of me and I had to choose to say yes to them, but like they still weren't in front of me. And I know that not everyone has those opportunities put in front of them, and that, other people have to fight more to find, opportunities. And, not everyone has the option to work an unpaid internship because they have to pay for their life. And I consider myself lucky to have had those opportunities and gotten the chance to do what I did. In terms of like the timeline, I mean, basically summer after my freshman, sophomore, and junior year, I was in Texas interning. The summer after my senior year, I lifeguarded. Freshman year in college, lifeguarded. Sophomore year, lifeguarded. Remember, I went to school for longer than 4 years. So then I spent and then I had 3 internships at this company. And then one of the summers was split and I had another internship working at a bank under my dad. So I had 7 internships by the time I graduated, which is super rare. And I lifeguarded for 3 summers. So I squeezed a lot in. So I'm now at Vista Research, owned by S&P. I graduated I sort of took my last classes in December. I went on a Euro trip and spent the $5,000 I had in my bank account, all of it in 28 days. And then came back on like a Friday and started work on Monday. So I started working at Vista Research in January 2007 and immediately couldn't live at home with my parents. And so even though I had this great plan to like save money, after 2 weeks, I had a best friend that had already been working for a year and was like, hey, I'll wait another 6 months so we can move in together. And then I called him after 2 weeks and I was like, dude, I just worked a 12-hour day and then got yelled at for not doing somebody else's dishes. Like, I'm fucking out. Let's find a place in the city we can move into. And so then I was like living and working full time in the city in February 2007 and loving it. And from there, sort of chapter heading. So I worked there for a few more years. That company had gone from rocket ship to sort of like crash and burn. And there's like a whole market dynamic that's really not important to this podcast. So I like watched a lot of my friends leave, and then they got acquired. So S&P had sold the business to another company, and I had the opportunity so I was lucky that I knew the CEO, and she basically said, there's 2 lists. There's like the you're fired, here's your severance list, or there's the go to the other company list. Like, which one do you want to be on? And she was like, warning, after like however many months, they can fire you and give you no severance. I had already been interviewing for 6 months. So I was like, I'll take the severance and run. So I was unemployed. I decided I wanted to work in startups in San Francisco. And I started doing like work in my network and doing informational interviews and just trying to figure out, like, I came to that conclusion as a part of like those informational interviews that I was doing. And then I reached out to the original CEO of that fintech startup that got acquired, who had left a year earlier, because he knew investors out in San Francisco and could connect me to some investors in their companies. And he was like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And then he called me back into his office and offered me a job. And it was like, hey, you want to work in like startups and entrepreneurship? Why don't you help me build a business within this business that I'm now running? So he was the CEO at another company, and he wanted to start a company like Vista Research within this new business. And he wanted to hire me and our number 1 tech guy, who was a good friend of mine. And I was like, wait, so I don't have to go from making like $100,000 to making $40,000 and move to a strange city? Like, I can sort of get what I wanted and keep my salary and benefits and all that other stuff. And so I took the offer and worked there I ended up basically being like the head of business development for a broker dealer, and really interesting work. It very much was like I was working in a sales role before, like very front facing, engaging with clients and just people all the time, to working in like an internal business development role, which was a choice because I felt like this is what I coach people to do all the time. Like I thought about my career as like a toolbox that I needed to fill with a lot of tools in order to do what I wanted to do later in life. And for me, I knew I wanted to run a business. I didn't know what the business was going to be, what industry or anything. I just knew that like that was something I was really interested in doing. And so this like internal operational role was like really not taking advantage of anything I had done prior and just developing new skills. And it was really, really valuable experience. But I got to the end of it and was really itching. I wasn't working in startups or in tech. Like I was working with the tech team, but I wasn't really working in technology. And so I had this brilliant idea that like this experience in finance and like my interest in tech, that like venture capital was the marriage of those two things. And so like that was what I wanted to do. And I mean, there was like reading and going to events and like finding a VC that I became obsessed with, named Fred Wilson at Union Square Ventures, who was like the original blogging investor. He funded like Twitter and Pinterest and Etsy and just like so many companies you've heard of. Really prolific person. And I was like, this is going to be the way. And I was totally wrong in this like finance and tech and whatever, like, but very glad I was wrong because I really ended up falling in love with it. So much so that I took an unpaid internship at 27 years old because it was the only way for me to get into the industry. Like venture capital is like a pretty impossible industry to get into. Like there are basically only nonlinear paths into it, except for this one path, which is like, oh, you want to go work in venture capital? Then go work in management consulting at like McKinsey or like investment banking, and then get an MBA and then get into it. Or go build a successful tech company and then go into venture capital, right? So like those are impossible paths, right? Like every single one of those things is like an impossible thing to do. So it's like, oh, you want to be a VC? Like go do this impossible thing and then you can get the impossible VC thing. So I wasn't going to let that like discourage me though. So I went to every event, went to every person, shook every hand, you know, like told people I work harder than anybody else in the world, which I'm sure they had heard from 100 other people before, but like didn't stop. I was at events like 4 days a week because they didn't really have events on Friday, and got this unpaid internship. Still really good friends with the guy, Lucas, that hired me. Very much like a mentor of mine, as was this guy, Thatcher, that also worked there. And that was sort of like my key into this world I wanted to get into. And so I worked there as an unpaid intern, and then as like an unpaid person that had given myself a better title than intern because they agreed to that, and was on my way to like getting my first paid job in venture, and stumbled across this really unique challenge that existed in the industry, which was like all of these international startups, all these people that started a tech company in another country and wanted to come and build and grow and raise money in the US, which makes sense because is the biggest venture capital market on the planet and the biggest enterprise and consumer marketplace on the planet. So like the investors are there, the customers are there. And so, but there was like no pathway for people to do that. It was like impossible. And startups were new. And like the consulates and trade groups and economic officers and chambers of commerce that were like tasked with helping companies with expanding into new markets had no experience with startups. And so they were giving like really terrible advice. So I decided that this was going to be my way of planting my flag in venture capital. I was going to become like the international guy. Like investors were in the U.S. Like most of the money was in the U.S. at the time, early stage capital. And they weren't looking at any companies abroad. They just weren't. Like venture was very local. And so I, coming from finance, was like, amazing. Like all this underserved market of people and companies and investors looking for really good deals. Like I'm going to bring basically, if you took apples and oranges, like two of the same company, all else equal, one's in New York and the other's abroad, the one abroad is going to have a valuation that's going to be like half. So it's like way cheaper to invest. And I'm like, great. All I have to do is find like enough of these really good companies. Investors will just start cutting checks. And so I decided to start an event series called Venture Out New York. And I would host these like pitch events featuring these companies from abroad. I would find like really promising companies around the world, and with the help sometimes of their government. And I would, having like spent time in this VC space, knew enough people would get investors on a panel and would fill a room for an event. I'd gotten to know about events because I had been to like 200 of them. And I had like an idea of like what I thought a good event was. Like I thought it should be something that didn't feel like you were going to work. It shouldn't be like in a boardroom with bright lights. It should be fun. There should be music. There should be food. There should be alcohol. And so I had this whole like idea and concept and like launched. There's a lot I'm leaving out, but just like to get to it. So this idea of like cheaper deals that are just as good and investors that would then choose to invest in them was also so wrong, like very wrong. And I had all of these like really amazing entrepreneurs coming and pitching and getting torn apart by these investors. And then being like, this was a mistake. I'm going home. And I was like, I am ruining these opportunities for these people. Like I have to figure this out. And so what I learned was, and like, this isn't critical either. It's like really more like just core to my business, that like venture is a local game by design. It's not meant to be international because like it's an activist investor strategy, meaning that like the investors work with the companies to help them grow. And they need to be able to say, like, after Brian's venture fund invests in Joanna's company, I know that your probability of success is greater because of the things that I know and the people that I know and how I can help you. So that's really hard to say for a company that's operating in a market that you don't have a network or knowledge in. And that's why it was local. And so I needed to help these companies establish and get like a little bit of traction in the US market. And then they would be able to raise money and succeed here. And so I built a 1-week program to help companies learn the right way to pitch, the right way to sell, the right way to incorporate their company and handle other legal technicalities and how to market and how to message. And so I basically set up like a 1-week boot camp where they would both learn stuff, but also meet investors and meet other entrepreneurs that were successful here in New York that could tell their stories and inspire them, and meet with big corporates that they maybe could partner with, and otherwise showcase them to like my network in New York City. And that idea worked. And so that was like the core of what Venture Out then came to be. This like platform for identifying companies that are ready for US expansion and helping them on the pathway to do that. So we do a lot more than just 1-week programs today. We do 3-month, like I'm going to incorporate you and actually help you with selling and raising money. We do one-on-one advisory where companies come to us and we just help them with selling or just helping them with raising money and all the other things involved in doing that successfully. We do some work with corporates. Mostly we're doing this stuff for foreign governments. So foreign governments pay us to build programs to help companies from their countries. We build sort of like pathways for their companies to find their way to the US. And I plan to raise a venture capital fund next year to start investing in the most promising companies that we come across. So really super full circle on this like mistaken idea of venture capital as a fit, because I have experience in finance and in tech. And so like really stumbled into like this place that I'm in now by making a lot of mistakes, but like continuing to move forward.
Well, and like you said, full circle. What a journey it's been. That is so cool. And we'll make sure that we actually have the links to your website so folks can check it out, especially if they're in the finance or VC or just like business or even international relations space. Like, it's just fascinating how it's all just kind of trickled into this like very narrow space that you've carved out for yourself, which is fascinating. So I'm going to ask you this very loaded question. Because I ask every guest that I have, now that we've heard the journey, right? Like literally from Brian 13 all the way to Brian 40, right? This path that you've been on, do you see yourself as successful?
Such a loaded question. No, I don't think I do. But I think that like going back to child version of myself, looking at this, talking to my Jewish grandma and like looking at what my dad had done, like the bar has always been really high. I don't know if I'll ever feel like I could really answer that question and say yes. But what I will say is that like I'm really in the weeds all day, every day. And there are moments where I am able, for whatever reason, to like pause, take a step back and look at what's happened and see how far I've come from where I was. And that's really satisfying. And that feels like success for sure. So, like answering the question, like, do I feel like I'm a success or I'm successful? It's like really hard to say yes to that. Also, because it just feels like it's so much hubris involved in it. And like, I want to have way more zeros in my bank account. But when I look at what I've done, and I think about like having no place getting into this venture capital world and making it happen and deciding that I was just going to become this international person in tech, having zero experience in that space, and then doing it, right? I had this like crazy idea that I was going to run one program a month for like up to 10 companies. And like the company was literally me. It was like me in this like back windowless room that my dad let me use in his office. And, or like on my couch in my apartment in the city, like in my boxers, like trying to take myself seriously and deciding that I was going to run a program every month, which meant I was going to be running 3 of them because everyone took 3 months of planning. And so I was going to be running 3 programs a month at any one time. And I was going to bring over 100 companies through every year. And that was like this really stretch goal. It was the idea was like reach for the stars and land on the moon. And I did it. I like ended up reaching the stars. Like we ended up hosting a program every single month, which literally I thought was impossible, and bringing over 100 companies through our first year. We've accelerated over 1,200 companies since we started. And almost all of those companies hopped on a plane from abroad and landed and joined us in New York, represented by like 1,800 founders that came through. Those companies have gone on to raise over $5 billion in capital and create over 15,000 jobs. And that feels like success. We are so far from where I want to as a business, and like raising a venture capital fund is what I've been told by people like smarter and more experienced than me, like the hardest thing they've ever tried to do. And so I feel like I have the biggest mountain that I will have ever tried to climb in front of me. And I'm like putting my pack together to get ready. So I feel like I've had success, and I feel like I want a lot more to feel like I'm successful, I guess is like the honest answer.
I appreciate that. And next question to immediately follow, and this will be the last one, kind of closing out. Having heard some of your own kind of trials and tribulations, some of the, like you said, going into a space where you had zero connections and like, just any skills that on paper would have immediately kind of excluded you from being in the running for working in a particular type of field. Anyways, I digress. I'm asking the question, if you could give some advice to some young adult, and that's kind of when I think about this age group, I think about the like 18 to 21 ish, right? Like that emerging adult launching into adulthood. If you could give any advice to somebody right now, and you kind of actually started this, so maybe it's like building off of or giving something else. You said, hey, in hindsight, I would have taken a post grad year for myself or two, or like, hey, generationally, we aren't putting so much pressure on this like young or adolescents now on going to school. It's more about finding the alternative path. But if there's any advice you could give somebody else beyond what you've already shared, what advice would you give to that young adult now?
Oh, so much. I have chats like this a lot with people that are younger than me and either interested in breaking into like one of the industries that I'm involved in, or just like taking their next step in their career. So the first is like, manage your network. I had a spreadsheet of like the people that I thought could help me with my career when I was in high school. Like, it's never too early to start building that list, because if you're just left like trying to remember the people that you think can help you, you're going to leave 90% of the critical people off of it. So start immediately keeping that list. And like, it feels weird, like, oh, I don't want to keep a list of people that I'm going to plan on like using in the future. Like, guess what? Grow up. That's life. That's how it works. Like, most people getting into, you need to leverage everything that you have. There are people that will have more advantages than you. They'll have a higher IQ than you, got a chance to go to a better school. Like, so use everything that you've got. And like, in building a network, every single person that you meet and reach out to and have a chat with, like, ask them to refer 2 or 3 people to you. And that's how you go from a list of 3 people to a list of 12, to a list of 40, to a list of 200, and then find a job or an internship or an opportunity. Everyone always says, do what you love, but they never tell you like how to do that. And so I feel like it's the best advice, but it's so impractical without some kind of playbook. And so being someone that works in tech and like loves tech and startups, and also I believe that like the culture at those kinds of companies is generally better than the culture in other industries, whether it's like finance or media or fashion or whatever. Like, the benefits are good. They pay, tech companies pay well. And so what I always do is say like, oh, well, what do you do, Joanna? Like, what do you do outside of work that you like? What are your passions outside of work?
Yeah, right now in the summer, paddleboarding.
Got it. And give me a couple more.
Being around my dogs. I do enjoy reading. I like working out. Occasionally watching ridiculous, like, cold case TV shows. Abnormal psych kind of stuff.
So let's just take like paddleboarding, fitness, and dogs. Okay. I could go on to crunchbase.com and look up companies that are in that. You can literally type in dog or pet and then search for companies that, let's say you want to work at a startup. So you search for companies that have raised more than $200,000 and less than 10 million. Or you want to work at a bigger company that's going to be able to pay you better. So you search for companies that have raised more than 20 or $30 million or have more than 50 or 100 employees. And you're going to see a list of like 30 or 40 companies that are building like Fitbits for dogs, or selling dog stuff online, or like BarkBox, or fitness, like working at Whoop, which creates this like really sophisticated like fitness tracker, or a company like Peloton, right, which has a sales department and a marketing department and an engineering department. So like, what do like, people are all like, there's 2 things you have to figure out. One is like, what's my function going to be? And then the other is what kind of company am I going to work at? And so I think within the tech space, it's really easy to find a company that aligns with something that you're passionate about, because I promise you, when you're out as a salesperson or a marketer and you're selling or marketing something that you give 0 shits about, versus doing that at a company that is in a space that you're passionate about, where you can really more feel like you're aligned with what this company is doing. Like, I'm helping pet owners have happier dogs. I am helping people get more fit. Like, that feels good. And also like you're into it personally. And so you're just naturally more engaged and inclined in that space. And so do that. Like, what are those things that you care about? You know, because like my wife, Adrienne, is in this world that you operate in. It's like every kid she talks to is into like gaming. Guess what? There are like tens of thousands of gaming companies in the world. Like you can go work in gaming. Your job isn't going to be playing games, right? Like you're not going to be, it's like becoming like a professional gamer is like becoming a professional sports athlete in terms of challenge. But like you can go work at one of these companies. You can go, you love football, go work at the NFL. They hire thousands of people in dozens of different role types. You can work in accounting or in sales or in marketing or in product or in advertising or whatever. And so that's the practical side of like work in a space that you care about. And like sometimes these things can feel impossible. It just takes a lot of time. Sometimes the step that you like, the place that you want to be, you have to take a couple of steps in order to get there. So figure out what those interim steps are. And like directly reaching out to the people that you want to work for or with is really powerful. It's much more powerful than sending a resume or like clicking submit on LinkedIn. And so do that. And then especially if you're in a space that you're passionate about, like, man, that email is going to write itself as to like reaching out to the CEO or the VP or MD or manager that you be reporting to tell them why you would absolutely fucking love to work there. And if this isn't the opportunity, your interest in this space and this company isn't going to change. And so like the next one or the one after that, like that goes a long way. And so that's my advice.
I love it. Brian, you are just a ball of knowledge. I am just like fascinated. I feel like I almost need to like listen to this all over again because, you know, honestly, the business side of business sometimes feels foreign to me. And yet I feel like that's very evident in the way that you talk, that is clearly what you are passionate about. So I appreciate you being, well, carving out time in a very busy schedule to chat with me, tell your story, and just be honest about that non-linear path of yours, because you are actually in the majority, right? Even though society paints this picture that's the, that is an anomaly or that's not common. That's actually not true at all. So anyways, thank you again for being on the podcast. You rock. And we'll make sure we have all of your contact information in the show notes.
This was so fun, Joanna. Thank you so much. And thank you for flattering me. I'm blushing.
That's it for this week's Success is Subjective episode. I want to thank my guests for joining me on this week and for being willing to share your journey. This podcast would not exist if it wasn't for people such as yourself. Stay tuned for the next episode where you can bet it'll be another amazing human sharing their personal story with the world. Make sure you check out the show notes where you will find contact information, website details, and all social media for our guests. And also put a face with a voice by accessing their interview on the newly formed successissubjective.org website. If you're interested in being a guest on the podcast, you can email me at Joanna, Joanna, at successissubjective.org. I would also be remiss if I didn't tell you to check out the collegealternative.org and lilyconsulting.com websites for additional resources outside of podcasting. If you're listening to the show on Apple Podcasts, please do me a favor and subscribe. And while you're at it, feel free to leave a review. You can also download to listen to Success is Subjective on any other popular podcast apps such as Amazon, Audible, Google, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn Radio. And last but not least, Success is Subjective is listener supported, made possible by me and by you. You can show support for the continuation of this podcast by donating on the successissubjective.org website. Thank you for tuning in, and remember, there is no single path through life. Success is what you make it.
Do you have a teenager or young adult who seems to have lost their way? Maybe they need help navigating adolescence, adulthood, and decisions surrounding higher education. Or maybe they have become withdrawn, their grades are slipping, or they are flat out living a reckless lifestyle, and you're concerned about their health and well-being. If this describes what your teen or young adult is facing, a therapeutic consultant may be able to help. Mental health, addiction recovery, and higher education can all be equally expensive. While information is everywhere, how do you know what option is the best one for your family? Some parents have the time to research and navigate this on their own. Some don't. If the latter applies to you, enter therapeutic consultants. Therapeutic consultants, like Joanna, listen to your family's specific needs and advocate on behalf of your loved one. TCs will research therapeutic resources, recommend treatment programs, and assist during adulthood transitions. Not being affiliated with any program, their support is completely objective and catered toward the best interest of each unique family. To find a qualified therapeutic consultant to work with, check out TCA, also known as the Therapeutic Consulting Association. Their website is therapeuticconsulting.org, all one word. Again, that's therapeuticconsulting.org. Then click the Find a Pro tab up at the top.